We warmly welcome you all to another episode of the Wilderness Insight, which is a project done by the Wilderness and Wildlife Rescue Society of Royal College, where we interview professionals related to the wildlife conservation field. My name is Malith Pathiratne, and I have my colleague Dharmaratne with me from the Senior Committee of the Wilderness and Wildlife Rescue Society, and we will be hosting today's discussion with Mr. Devaka Weerakoon. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
So before we move on to our topics of discussion, sir, could you please give us a brief introduction about yourself and your fields of interest?
I'm currently a professor in the Department of Zoology and Environmental Sciences at University of Colombo. I actually became interested in zoology in my childhood. I was born and raised in a small hamlet near Devaka called Kaudana, and my backyard was Bella Marsh. So I used to spend a lot of my childhood days in the marsh because I was fascinated by the creatures that lived in the marsh, mostly the fish. And as I grew up, I went to Royal College. That's where I finished my secondary education, where I was involved in the Nature Society. So I continued my interest in natural life. And then from Royal College, I moved on to University of Colombo, where I met some very interesting teachers like Prof. Agama, Prof. who really opened my eye to the world of natural world of animals and plants. So I spent most of my first and second year in the forest doing various kinds of projects. And when it came for me to choose a subject area to specialize, I selected zoology. Then I went and did my postgraduate studies in US. After coming back, I received a grant to study elephants. So I studied wild elephants for nearly 10 years continuously. And then I also got a chance to get involved in the National Red Listing Program, which is the program that is looking at the status of our species. I was heading the animal component. So I got a very clear understanding about what are the conservation issues in the country in doing that. So that is what made me into a conservation biologist. And that's the kind of work that I do, try to conserve threatened species or species that are running the risk of extinction, because we have lots of such species, even though we are a small island. We have a lot of species that are found only in Sri Lanka, and unfortunately many of them are at the brink of extinction. So I think that has been my driving force, trying to find ways to prevent these species from becoming extinct, because they are very important for Sri Lanka and for the people in this country.
So moving on. It is to our knowledge that ecology and behavior of Asian elephants is one of your fields of interest. So what is your take on the forever rising human-elephant conflict in Sri Lanka?
I think you should all know that not a day passes by without us seeing either elephant falling into a well, or somebody being killed by an elephant, or elephant being killed by people. And so what we have is escalating human-elephant conflict, especially in the North Central province, Eastern province, and the Northwestern province of Sri Lanka. So this is why I started working on elephants about 25 years ago. That was my first project. I worked in Northwestern province, trying to understand the elephant behavior, their ecology, and what is causing the human-elephant conflict, because our idea was to find lasting solutions to the problem. So during the last 25 years, I think myself and most of my colleagues who have been working on elephants, we have done a great deal of research and we have come to understand a lot of things about elephants. Over the last 2 decades, we have developed a number of action plans, strategic action plans as to what needs to be done in this country to deal with this problem, because nearly 2/3 of Sri Lanka is affected by this problem. So it's not a very simple problem to solve. It's a very complex problem, but it's a problem that has solutions. So we have suggested a series of things to the Department of Wildlife Conservation, which is the national agency that is dealing with it. However, the unfortunate thing is a lot of these recommendations have not been taken up because they require a fair bit of involvement, and I think uh, the government has not shown the type of motivation that is required for us to get this thing off the ground. And the consequence of that is an escalating problem. We see that the number of elephants dying during the last few years have almost doubled. And also we lose large number of people and their property, their crops. So all these things are indicating that we have an escalating problem. However, lack of initiative uh, from the agencies that are responsible, I think, is one of the biggest issues we are facing. To answer your question, it is a problem that can be solved, but I think it requires a great deal of motivation and intervention from our part if we want to bring it under control. And I don't see that happening in this country at the moment.
Thank you, sir. So since this is one of your areas of specialty, sir, so what do you who do you think caused the human-elephant conflict, sir? So do you think it was something that was supposed to happen in a matter of time, or did it take place due to the irresponsible action of humans?
Conflict, a human-elephant conflict is just one of the conflicts that we are having with animals in this country. We are in conflict with crocodiles. We are in conflict with leopards. You would have seen a large number of leopards were lost last year. Most of them have been killed due to being caught in traps and so on. We are also in conflict with monkeys. The unfortunate thing is a lot of these animals that we are in conflict with are globally threatened species. They're in the brink of extinction, and the conflict will push them even closer to extinction. So this is one of the biggest issues. So the reason why conflicts happen, uh, like you said, it is inevitable because you should see the human population is rising. If you look at Sri Lanka, we are a small island, but we have a very, very high human density. At the turn of last century, we had about 1 million people, but by the end of the century, we have uh, increased up to 21 million. So when the human population increases, along with that, their needs increases. So we have to produce more food, which means we have to bring more areas under agriculture. And to support that, we have to bring large irrigation projects, which results in further loss of forest, and also various other infrastructure, settlements. All these things results in loss of natural areas. So that means the more natural areas that are lost, we are bringing more and more animals. We're displacing them, we are blocking their movement patterns. So they will come into our areas and start utilizing some of our resources. That's where the conflict starts. Either they are feeding on our crops, damaging our crops, or they are damaging our property. And the worst thing that can happen is they can attack us and cause mortality or injury to people. So this is the issue that we are seeing, that is increasing population leading to increasing demands. And in order to meet these demands, we are changing the landscape in a very rapid way. But again, the root causes are, if we look at the way we have developed this country, we have not done it in a planned manner. And as a result, the land use planning has not been done very carefully, and that has brought people and animal into constant interaction, and many of these interactions are negative and are interpreted as a conflict. So I think one of the things that we really have to be thinking about, even at this late stage, is how can we plan our land use in a very careful manner so that we leave enough space for wild animals as well as meet the demands of the people. It can be done. There are many countries that have done it. If you look at many of the developed countries like Japan or South Korea in our area, they have managed to do their development in a very well-planned manner so that they can keep these conflicts at a minimum. We cannot bring it to a zero, but we can minimize it significantly if we can plan things properly. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing today. How do we bring planned land use management into this country so that we can protect as much natural resources as possible, but at the same time, we provide the needs of the people. So this is where I think we have to be heading, and I can see some movements or some action towards getting there, albeit very slowly. But I think that is something that we have to rapidly do if we wish to minimize these conflicts, because the conflicts do have a very heavy toll, especially on marginalized populations, poor people, because if you look at where most of the conflict centers are, they're not in the urban centers where affluent people live. Most of the conflicts take place in villages where people are living very close to poverty lines. And when these conflicts happen, they are pushed even more into poverty, which is a very sad state of affairs. So I think as a nation, this is something that we have to be mindful of and work towards to ensure that we have sustainable development in this country with little conflict and conserving our rich natural resources.
So, continuing. We know management of invasive alien species is one of your research interests. So, what are some unique characteristics of such types of species, and how do you find out whether an organism is an invasive species or not?
Well, most invasive species are very robust. They're very strong competitors. They have very fast growth rates. Like if you take a fish like tilapia or tank cleaner, they're very, I mean, if you take a tank cleaner, I think most of you may have seen them if you have an aquarium or if you have, a small fish tank. Um, you can take it out and keep it outside for quite a while and it doesn't die. It's very robust, very strong. And they grow quickly, they reproduce faster, and they are superior competitors. They compete with native species. So we have introduced large number of plants and animals to this country for a variety of reasons. For uh, forestry, control, like we've introduced guppies to control the malaria vector mosquito. We have introduced certain plants for horticultural purposes. We have introduced large number of fish like tilapia for aquaculture. So, and also we have accidentally introduced number of things, especially like things that we have in our households. Like if you have a tank full of fish and if you get tired of it, what we do is we just go and dump it in the closest canal or paddy field or whatever. And some of these fish can survive. And that is how we think we have two very rapidly spreading fish in the Western province. One is tank cleaner, the other one is the clown knifefish. Both of them have been brought to Sri Lanka as aquarium fish and has been accidentally released to the environment. And now they are rapidly increasing uh, and the clown knifefish is a predator. It feeds on a lot of our native species. So they are a huge challenge to our native species, and that's why we think invasive species are one of the greatest uh, problems we are facing, one of the greatest challenges we are facing in conservation, because it's very difficult to control them once you introduce them into the natural world. So how do we find whether species is invasive? What we do is we continuously, when we see something spreading rapidly, we continuously monitor them. We try to see how their distribution changes. Are they spreading into? So basically, when you look at an invasive species, it's like a cancer. In our body, we have a certain number of different types of cells. And if one type of cell chooses to rapidly multiply, it will take the room available for other cells. And that is what causes the mortality of the person who's suffering from cancer. Likewise, when you introduce foreign species into a country, they don't have their normal control. So they start rapidly multiplying and spreading into areas, taking the space available for native species. So native species will go extinct. That is the threat we are facing. So invasive species are a major problem. That's why we started studying them for the last 10 years or so. We're trying to identify which species are invasive and what kind of strategies we can use to control them. But the lesson we have learned is controlling invasive species is extremely difficult. Even developed countries like Australia have tried it and have with very little success. So the main thing we have to do is we have to control introduction of alien species into this country. So during the last few years, the laws that are necessary and the protocols that are necessary to control that has come into being. Now they are in place. So we have some control over the process, but the species that are already here and who have already established, it will take us a long time to deal with them. Because it's very expensive on one hand. And the other thing is these are very robust species. No matter how much you control them, they just keep coming back. So it's like trying to control a cancer. It's a difficult thing. So that is the main issue we are facing. We have more invasive plants than animals in this country. And many of them are very rapidly distributing in various critical habitats, especially in wetlands. If you go to any of the wetlands in Colombo, you can see at least 2 or 3 invasive species like Iconia, Salvinia, or Pondapple, Vellata. These are changing the environment completely because they have that kind of capacity. They, if you take Bellamula Arcadia, where I learned my uh, initial, I did my initial work as a young person. Now it is no more because it's already been invaded by many invasive species, and Bellamula Arcadia has been converted into a the diversity in that this habitat has declined significantly. So it's a huge threat, and it's a huge challenge to deal with it.
Thank you, sir. So moving on to our next question, sir. So in the incident of the express pearl vessel that took place a few months ago affected the marine biodiversity at large scales. We saw a lot of animals be coming into shores and everything. So what do you think that can be done to bring that ecosystem to its former self?
This is not the first time we had an incident like this. If you look at the recent records, we've had about 4 or 5 such incidents happening. So when you have a incident like this, a marine disaster, the best option is the prevention. So you have to all the countries that are involved in maritime transport. Now Sri Lanka is, because of our strategic location, our western coast is frequented by large number of ships. So this kind of accident is quite possible. There's a very high probability of this happening, and in fact It has happened several times, and Express Pearl is the latest of those incidents. So I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to be prepared to prevent such accidents. And I think looking at the reports that are coming up, what we see is this is an accident that could have been prevented because the ship has visited two other ports before it came to Colombo. Both of them, one in India and one in Qatar. They were all state-of-the-art ports which could have averted, which could have handled this leakage that they were facing. Even though it has been reported to them, they have declined to address that issue. So it ended up in our waters, and unfortunately at a very difficult time because at the time it caught fire, there was also a cyclone, so it really prevented us from handling the fire. And as we all see, it ended up in one of the worst maritime disasters in Sri Lanka. And we still are seeing the impacts of it. Still, we are getting dead animals washed ashore. And plastic nurdles continue to get washed off into our beaches. And also, when you look at the ocean, it has no boundaries. So the impact is not only on Sri Lanka, it transcends beyond Sri Lanka's boundary into other countries where we share the Indian Ocean with. So what can we do about things like this? One of the things is we have to have very good plans to how do we deal with such incidents or prevent this kind of disaster. Now, if you can't prevent it, the second thing that we have to do is containment. When the ship started, when it caught fire, when it was evident that we are heading towards a disaster, we should have the ability to cover up the area and contain the problem into a smaller area. Again, we found that two things. One, we did not have the capacity. We don't have the equipment that is necessary to deal with such an incident. And number two, again, the ocean was rough. So working in a rough ocean is very difficult. So containment also failed. Now we are at the mercy of whatever the impacts it was going to unfold, and we are seeing firsthand the damages they are doing. So at this point of time, uh, the third thing we can do is try and do some damage control. So at the moment, most of the damage control is done in the beaches because a lot of these things are getting washed off into our beach, like plastic nurdles and so on, which are being removed. But what is happening in the ocean, we still don't have a good handle of it because, like I said, when this disaster happened, it happened at the worst time possible because it happened off the coast of Colombo, and the southwestern part of Sri Lanka is affected by the southwest monsoon, which makes the ocean rough, which is very difficult for people to go under water and see what kind of damage has happened to our coral reefs, seagrass beds, which are submerged habitats, which you cannot see from outside. But still the ocean is rough, the water is too turbid, so it doesn't allow divers to go in and make an assessment. So I think the first thing we'll have to do is make an assessment to see what is the level of damage that has happened to offshore critical habitats like coral reefs, because if you look at Malawat area, there are a number of submerged reefs in that area, in the Kinross area. And further down in Hikkaduwa, in Galle, Rumasela, we have some very critical coral reefs. And when you look at the spread of the plastic nurdles, it has spread from Galle all the way up to Kalpitia, where we have another important coral reef called Bar Reef. So we don't know what the damage is. So I think the first thing is we have to start doing a damage assessment, and then we'll have to make some decision whether we want to do some restoration or we would allow these systems to naturally recover. So what we'll have to do is continuously observe them. And if we see that the recovery is slow, then we'll have to go and start doing some actual interventions, like start growing corals. There are restoration procedures that we can follow, which can help us to speed up the recovery process. But all this requires money, and this disaster hit us at a very bad time because the country is suffering from COVID-19. Our economy is in pretty dire straits. So I can't see whether the government would want to invest on this. And I'm not sure whether we will get enough compensation from the state so that some of the money can be put into this restoration program. So there are a lot of unanswered questions at this point of time. We are only like +3 months from the disaster. Only time will tell how we will deal with this. But uh, at least at this point of time, what we should be thinking about is at least be prepared. We should try to avoid this kind of disaster in the future, should have better disaster preparedness plans, better equipment, even better monitoring, because one of the issues that came up when we have these dead animals getting washed ashore was whether they are dying due to the disaster or whether they are dying due to other natural causes. And we have not done enough baseline studies in this country to know what is the normal death rate of turtles or marine mammals uh, in the absence of such a disaster. So the only way we can see what the impact is if we know what is the normal death rate, whether the death rate has increased above and beyond that normal rate, then we know what is whether it's a significant impact or not. Now we don't have that kind of information because we have not invested on studies that will generate that kind of data to Sri Lanka. So at least I think we learned a few lessons from this disaster. That is, we need to do more in our oceans. We have to do baseline studies. We have to monitor our coral reefs to see what their current status. So if a disaster happens, we can make a damage assessment. Then we will also know what needs to be done in order to recover them. But I think recovery should be the last option. Like I said, the first option or our main focus should be to avoid such disasters in the future. Because once a disaster happens, all sorts of things can happen which will take it beyond control. And then I think it's very difficult to come back and do recovery, because when environment is damaged, recovering it is hard. Preventing is the best. Like even in health, preventing a disease is much better than trying to treat the person once the disease has been encountered. This is what we've been told day in and day out with respect to the COVID-19. Try and avoid getting the disease, because once you get it, anything can happen. So avoidance is the best option, failing which preparedness to deal with it is the next thing. So I think at least I hope the responsible agencies will learn the lesson and do the needful, that we will be in a better position to handle such situations in the future.
So as you mentioned, the country is suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic severely. So how has it affected your work?
Well, my work basically, since I'm working in the uni, I do a lot of teaching and also research and also extension work. I do a lot of awareness work with NGOs, because part of the conservation work is trying to create awareness, change people's attitudes, get people to do the right thing. So those are the main areas where I am engaged in. So my teaching was not affected much, because we're doing a lot of this work from a distant mode using e-resources. However, I feel that even though I'm not affected, I feel my students are affected. It's for me, I just have to give the lecture, but they are in the process of learning in a very difficult time. A lot of them are under a lot of stress. They have issues at home, issues with respect to connectivity. So I don't have to sit for exams. I only have to deliver the lecture. So I feel very bad about my students because they are not getting the best out of me, or they are not getting the best education at the moment. For the last 1.5 years, uh, my students are suffering. They can't come to laboratory classes, so they are only getting lectures. And the subject that I'm teaching has a lot of practical. We take students out into field visits so that we can show them firsthand the things that we are talking about. So we have very little ability to do practicals these days. So their learning is limited to just listening to lectures, which I don't think is the ideal situation. So whether I am affected, no, but I am affected because my students are affected. Because my job is not just to give lectures, but to make sure that my students learn things. So that way, I think I'm significantly affected in doing my job in the proper way. My research again, since I'm a conservation biologist, my work is out there in the field. I have to, one day I'm in Mana, another day I'm in Dharmaratne, another day I have to go to Yala. But because of the travel restrictions, I cannot travel much these days. Other than the essential work, we have cut down on most of our field research, which is again a setback because sometimes some of the studies need to be require me to continuously work. So if I have a 2-3 month gap, that makes it very difficult for me to interpret the information. So the research, I think, is more effective than teaching. But the extension work, I have still managed to do it again using the distant mode, like what I'm doing with you. We have done a lot of webinars, various types of lectures using the Zoom facilities or internet platforms. But again, I think we only reach a certain segment of the society who can only afford to have this kind of facilities. Now, most of the work that I have been doing is at grassroots level, where we go and work with poor villages, where you have most amount of impact on conservation. But with these, since they don't have the facilities that are required to engage with us, I think extension work is also somewhat affected. So overall, I think my work is affected, but what I also understand is I'm old now. I don't have a long way to go, but I do feel for the young generation because you have the world ahead of you, a whole life ahead of you. And I think I feel very bad about the plight that has affecting the young community in this country or in this world. I mean, it's not something that is affecting us, it's affecting the whole world. So I'm hoping that we can come out of this sooner than later, and so we can get back on life, get back on track and do what we would like to do with our lives. So with that, that is the hope I have.
Thank you, sir, for those words. And that wraps up the interview for today. Once again, thank you, sir, for your time. We learned a lot today and hope you find success in all of your future research. Have a good day, sir.
Hope you enjoyed, sir. Thank you, sir.
It's always a pleasure to come back to the college whenever I can. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, and all the very best to you all as well.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.
Thank you.